You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Lisa Davis with another Catholic Momcast. I consider myself especially blessed to have had a mother that not only read to her children, but one who read poetry. Probably starting with Mother Goose, though I remember hardly anything from out of the mouth of the goose. What I do remember are the story poems from the pages of my mom's revered tome, Best Loved Poems of the American People, circa 1936. This is the book my mother grew up with, that her mother read from. Selections such as The Ghost of the Little White Kitten and Curfew Must Not Ring Tonight, together with its parody, Towser Must Be Tied Tonight. I'm not sure about the rest of my brothers and sisters, but I was hooked from the single digits. The economy of words telling a story or lesson, the careful organization of lines and stanzas, and the rhythm. A good poem is a song without a melody, a beat without a drum, harmony with words alone. Add the perfect satisfaction of unforced rhyme from the pen of the masters, and I don't understand how anyone isn't a fan. Needless to say, our children grew up with poetry too. I couldn't resist. And in revolt against a modernist educational philosophy that no longer believed in memorization, our kids bent their little minds to learning many poems by heart over the 30 years that we home taught. I'm not sure, but I think that if I give most of them the starting lines of a few of the poems we learned, they can complete a whole host of classic poetry. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky are the first words of a poem teaching the value of appreciating God's work and all the little beauties of nature. And our favorite autumn poem that also celebrates God's hand in the change of the seasons begins, "O suns and skies and clouds of June and flowers of June together, you cannot rival for 1 hour October's bright blue weather." A sentiment I personally hold dear just now, as I'm already tired of Iowa's humidity. God bless it. How about this one? Can you finish it? Many of us learned this one in grade school. "Lovely lady dressed in blue, teach me how to pray." Or do you remember the one that begins like this? "September's skies are sapphire hue, blue gentians star the woods at morn. Near crystal pools and woodland aisles, in this bright month a queen was born." I could go on and on. I have quite a library of poetry now, especially since Sister Evangeline and I have had a poem challenge, exchanging one-for-one handwritten discoveries pinned to the church bulletin board ever since she entered the convent. There are many kinds of bonds we can tie between our hearts and our children's, connected to all kinds of wholesome things. But linking memories with poetry, music, and classic stories, especially those that are also tied with ribbons of faith, well, these are especially lasting and beautiful. Mrs. Fitzgerald was a dear old friend that we had the honor to meet back in the 80s when she sold us her home in order to enter a retirement home just before her last illness. She was in her 80s and so thrilled that another Catholic family would be moving into her home. We talked and talked and talked and had so much in common because we shared the faith. We ended up helping her pack up her house to get her moved before we could move in because most of her family had preceded her in death or lived too far away. But while we were packing, she recited poetry she learned in grade school at the turn of the century. And oh my goodness, you guys, she remembered amazingly long poems word for word and could still recite the catechism by heart. Don't ever let anyone tell you memorization is a bad thing. Make sure and exercise that muscle. When all else had gone, Mrs. Fitzgerald still carried in her head and heart some of the most beautiful words ever written, and the most important facts necessary to save her soul. I'm still collecting poetry even now. I think perhaps next week I'll have to share a beautiful post-communion prayer/poem that Sister Evangeline and I found simultaneously but separate from one another. Today, though, I have another special one, a poem written by a woman named Lois Blanchard in the early part of the 20th century. It received a wide acclaim when it was recited in a musical format on a popular radio show in 1956, and was shared again in Reminisce magazine in the 1990s. And I'm going to share it here with you today. There's one prerequisite, however, to listening to this poem. As we meditate on the words, we are allowed to apply them to ourselves and to no one else. If Jesus came to your house. If Jesus came to your house to spend a day or two, if he came unexpectedly, I wonder what you'd do. Oh, I know you'd give your nicest room to such an honored guest, and all the food you'd serve to him would be the very best. And you keep assuring him you're glad to have him there, that serving him in your own home is joy beyond compare. But when you saw him coming, would you meet him at the door with arms outstretched in welcome to your heavenly visitor? Or would you have to change your clothes before you let him in? Or hide some magazines and put the Bible where they'd been? Would you turn off the radio and hope he hadn't heard, and wish you hadn't uttered that last loud, hasty word? Would you hide your worldly music and put some hymn books out? Could you let Jesus walk right in, or would you rush about? And I wonder if the Savior spent a day or two with you, would you go right on doing the things you always do? Would you go right on saying the things you always say? Would life for you continue as it does from day to day? Would your family conversation keep up its usual pace, and would you find it hard each meal to say a table grace? Would you sing the songs you always sing, and read the books you read, and let him know the things on which your mind and spirit feed? Would you take Jesus with you everywhere you'd plan to go, or would you maybe change your plans for just a day or so? Would you be glad to have him meet your very closest friends? Or would you hope they'd stay away until his visit ends? Would you be glad to have him stay forever on and on? Or would you sigh with great relief when he at last was gone? It might be interesting to know the things that you would do if Jesus Christ in person came to spend some time with you. G.K. Chesterton tells us, poetry is sane because it floats easily in an infinite sea. To accept everything is an exercise, to understand everything a strain. The poet only desires exaltation and a world to stretch himself in. The poet only asks to get his head into the heavens. It is the logician who seeks to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits. Do you have a favorite poem, or maybe one you just remember having learned it many years ago? Please do share in the comments. This is Lisa, trying to get her head into the heavens. God bless everyone.
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.